Hi, I'm Sandeep, and you're watching the Indian Weekender. Right now, we are sitting on the cusp of general elections with just 47 days remaining for the election day on October 17th. And if we consider when advance voting begins, which is on 3rd of October, then we might have only a few weeks left before we exercise the most gifted privilege in modern democratic societies, the privilege to vote. Yes, yeah, you are right that voting is indeed a right, uh, but yet it is nothing less than a privilege in our modern societies. A privilege that not everyone around the world enjoys. An opportunity to elect who we want to rule us and form the next government. So, on this important topic, how do our fellow ethnic minority migrant communities view this privilege and exercise their votes? The upcoming elections, we are told, are going to be the most important in recent times, not only because of COVID 19 and the accompanied social and economic distress, but also because our ethnic migrant communities, many experts believe, are going to be at the forefront of bearing the brunt of that economic and social distress. So, what our ethnic communities are going to do about that? Are they excited and revved up for casting their votes in the next elections? Are they making their political parties and political representatives work hard to earn their trust and vote? On the other hand, do they participate actively in the electoral process? Or are they putting any premium on their votes? So we have got numerous questions, and to discuss on that today, we have got some distinguished guests joining us. We will be speaking to distinguished academician Professor Spoonley, who is an authority on immigration, social cohesion, multiculturalism, and many other things. And we will also be joined by two of Indian community leaders, Prashant Belwalkar and Sandeep Sharma from Christchurch. So, welcome to our studio, gentlemen. How are you all today? So, Professor Spoonley, I'm really excited to start. I was really amazed with the first comment reading last weekend in one of the RNZ stories, where you have made the comment that you are kind of not impressed with the way political parties have engaged and canvassed the minority votes in this country. So, what made you to say that or think that way?
Well, I think the first thing, Sandeep, is that really the communities, and particularly the Indian community, has changed enormously. And I'm not sure whether you and others realize, but the size of the Indian community between the two censuses, 2013, 2018, grew by almost a third. So we're going to have in this election a lot of people who are voting for the first time as Indians in our general election. And they might be that because they're new migrants, but it might also because they're Indians who've been living in New Zealand for some time and have reached the age of um, where they can vote. And so I was really interested to look at the political parties. And I was looking at several things. Were they putting up good quality Indian candidates high on the list? Were those candidates beginning to talk to those communities? And were we seeing in the policies of our major political parties policies which would begin to talk to the concerns of the Indian community? And of course, I think one of the key ones that we'd all agree concerns immigration policy.
Surely. Well, I would say, Professor, you have touched upon some of very core issues that our broader Kiwi Indian communities feel that right now what we are experiencing is more a tokenism rather than a real political engagement. And to get more view on that, probably I would like to speak to Prashant Belwalkar. As our audiences would know, he is a leader of Marathi Association here, and he do a lot of other community stuffs and is quite well known in the community, especially for his I would say politically charged up views. We will check with Prashant if he's happy with that introduction or not. Welcome to our studio. Welcome to our virtual studio, Prashant. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. And yeah, it's always good to have some spice added on into the introduction. So thanks for that.
Great. So, would you agree with what Professor Paul had just commented and observed about participation and engagement from political parties with our Kiwi Indian community?
I think he really has touched upon spot on in terms of the two things that really matter to the migrant community, especially the Indian community. One is obviously the representation and whether there's an actual work being done or efforts being done towards representing them in the right manner. Because just having a token representation doesn't really mean anything, and that's what is very important. And his point that a lot of we were probably first generation migrants, but our kids have now become eligible to vote, and they probably also become a substantial part of the voting population now, is what I believe is important. And they may have completely radically different views because they have grown up in this environment. So it's very important how the parties are sort of addressing both these generations in one go. And I think that needs to be debated. Yeah.
Sure. Now, going back to what Professor Paul has initially said, he basically said about the first or maybe the last 10 years when probably the size of Kiwi Indian communities has grown in substantial numbers. Well, Professor Paul, in that last 10 years, probably we have seen the technically on papers. We have seen the political representation going as well. Like right now, we have got 3 Kiwi Indian MPs in the parliament, with 2 from National, 1 from Labour, and last year, in the last term, we had 1 from New Zealand First as well. So why this dichotomy that we are seeing probably 3 MPs successively in parliament, still community is not happy with what they are getting in terms of political participation process?
Well, I think Sandeep and Prashant can answer part of that, Sandeep. But what I would say is, firstly, um, this election, all of those MPs are list MPs. So one issue for this election is, given the way in which the polls are beginning to track, you might find that you might not even get all of those MPs back into Parliament. So I think a key message is, where do you put your Indian representatives in this example on the list, and whether they're going to be sufficiently far up the list to get back into Parliament. The second thing is, we've talked about tokenism. I do worry that 1 or 2 MPs who are in the category Indian are therefore meant to represent the whole of the Indian community in sort of cabinet process or party political process. And I just get very concerned that we put a lot of emphasis on a very small number. And what I would like to see done is partly to see the Indian representatives there as party political representatives, but I would like to see the political parties, particularly the non-Indian leadership, take responsibility for interacting with and representing the Indian community. And I'm just a little bit worried as we head into this election that we're getting parties saying, look, we don't consider or address ethnic concerns because we're a party for everybody. When you're a party for everybody, you quite often miss out on representing the very important minority ethnic and religious communities. And so it's that sort of tension between, representing a community which has very specific interests and the sort of broad party politics.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense, and probably that takes us back to the recent, I would say, chaos that we have seen within one of the political parties when they were questioned for lack of Maori representation over there in their frontline caucus. So, is that something you are suggesting that we need to see more engagement from political parties? They just can't walk away by saying that they are a party for everyone, and that's why probably they would be looking forward or looking after the interest of every segment of society. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, it is, Sunday, because we're an incredibly diverse community. So I'm not suggesting that the current MPs are not representing the Indian community. What I'm saying is that, are they compromised by party political politics? So is there something that we should be doing which talks to those Indian communities, gets that Indian community voice heard? So I would go back to the point that you've made, that, a certain ambivalence around Māori leadership on the front bench. but also when you go back to the comments that were made by a certain New Zealand First politician, when you felt perhaps as a member of an Indian community that the Minister of Immigration wasn't representing your views around partnership visas or parent visas. It's those moments when you think, are those views actually being adequately represented in Parliament? And the final thing I would like to say, Sandeep, is that my very simple, very crude test is what proportion of the Indian population, um, of the New Zealand population, I beg your pardon, is the Indian community? So at the moment, I think the Indian community is underrepresented in an MMP Parliament, that you should be expecting more than 3 Indian MPs simply to keep track alongside the proportion of the population that is the Indian community. The Indian community in New Zealand make up almost 250,000 people.
Sure, it does.
Yeah.
Now, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, for touching on two very key issues. A, you say that Indian community is underrepresented as of now, so we definitely need more MPs. And B, without getting into controversy on making a judgment of our existing 3 Kiwi Indian MPs, you have very smartly said that probably they are, I would say, challenged by the existing political processes to not represent the sentiments. So I will rather go to Prashant and check with him. Does he feel the same, that our Kiwi Indian MPs, are they being able to stand up for the issues that matter to Kiwi Indian community, or he has some other thoughts? Prashant.
I tend to agree with Paul in this aspect, that one of the problems that when you're on a list MP, you're at the mercy of the party basically, to represent the party's values rather than the constituent values that you try to bring in. Now, there can be personalities who can overcome that kind of stuff, but unfortunately, and without naming across party lines, I would say that the current crop of MPs who are representing the Indian community in the parliament do not really have that kind of a built-in environment to say that they can represent truly what is the aspirations of the migrant community or the migrant Indian community. One of the key things, if you really look at it from an Indian point of view, the two aspects which really they form a core base are, from an immigration point of view, the education policies and the immigration visa policy is very important to them, because they constitute nearly 47% of the intake of the education sector. So it's by no means a very small number. It's a huge number that gets impacted because of that. Secondly, if you look at the immigration numbers itself and people who are looking at permanent residency or making this as their home country, again, along with China, India is the second largest ethnic group which comes into this country. Unfortunately, the issues that they face once they come up here and see this as their new home are not being addressed by any of the political parties or their representatives, who should be doing that. Thirdly, if you look at it, the business community, from a business point of view, Indians lead in terms of the number of private entrepreneurial business ownerships within this country. Again, that particular industry is not being represented at all in the parliament. Their issues are also not being talked about. So to sum up all these, I think really what we need is not numbers in terms of just the numbers for the sake of equal proportional representation, but numbers which will translate into actual voice being heard of the difficulties faced by the migrant community.
Definitely. Now, thanks, Prashant, for sharing some of expectations and aspirations of our broader Kiwi Indian community. And talking about aspirations, I would like to go to Sandeep, who is waiting very patiently, like our emerging young leaders within the community who are waiting for their chance. So we are going to speak to Sandeep, who is joining us from Christchurch. He is a marketing manager in University of Canterbury over there. And in his working capacity, he works a lot with the broader Kiwi Indian and the South Asian community to provide pastoral care to students. But it is more than his day role, where he is connected with Kiwi Indian community in the Christchurch, that makes us very interesting to go and speak to him. So welcome to our virtual show, Sandeep. How are you today?
Thank you. Very well. My namesake. I'm good. Thanks.
Great. So, Sandeep, you have been hearing from one of a very distinguished academician from and very revered as well in terms of his views on immigration, and you are listening to one of a seasoned community leader. So, talking about your experience, you have been in the country probably around 5 years, and you have been actively engaged as well. I believe this is going to be your second elections where you would be participating in the process. So, what has been your understanding about political engagement process of our Kiwi Indian community?
So that's a very good question. And I would like to probably I'll sound repetitive over here because some of the points have been touched by Paul and Prashant quite well in what they said. But sticking to Christchurch, I feel that the political engagement over here when it comes to the ethnic communities has been more of a very token sort of representative way where we have people who come down. So we don't have anyone in the community which is actively involved with the party in terms of holding a position or having the banner of the party over here. So we've got people who visit from North Island and they come here as and when the time is appropriate, engage with the community, hear them out. But honestly, I've been in rooms with people who come from various walks of life. As Prashant mentioned, some of them are entrepreneurs, some of them are working professionals, some of them are students, and all of them have their individual issues which have been heard. But honestly, when the person leaves the ground, there is no feedback or action followed on it. And specifically, if we touched upon immigration, and there has been a couple of meetings that I've been part of, where the entire community and the diaspora was involved. As you know, India is quite diverse in its regions and representations, but here in Christchurch, we do a very good job in coming together and making our voice heard in such a common cause. Unfortunately, there was no development, no feedback, and cases
Right.
haven't been
So,
heard back
yeah,
yet.
Sandeep, I would like to ask from your perspective that what exactly is your expectation? What do you expect after you have been heard or you have had those meetings that you're talking about with our political representatives? What more remains to be done, or what in your mind needs to be done following up on that?
I think, first of all, more than just acknowledgement, is that there has to be an action point that these relevant points have been considered and at least they've been raised on a certain level where a decision making process is mechanism is working and these points have been discussed, so that assurance needs to be there. Secondly, of course, people come and they make us believe that they understand, but that empathizing factor, again, going back to the immigration aspect where people have, I deal with a lot of international students who've got their partners stuck overseas. That empathizing factor, sometimes it gets missed out. So these are the key things that we need, rather than just acknowledgement, a certain amount of movement when it comes to, okay, these are the things, these are the action points that we made when we last discussed, and this time when I'm coming back, these are exactly the things that I went back with, and here's the progress report, and here onwards we're going to go on and have devised another plan to come up with a strategy to accomplish that. I see that missing as a missing part of this whole process.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. I will go to speak to Paul now and touch base on some of the issues that you and Prashant have raised. So, Professor Paul, you have heard the views from, I would say, two different spectre of our community. One, a seasoned one who have been here for decades, and another one who is quite young and he is just engaging in the political engagement process. So, do you think this list MP system, which eventually get our ethnic MPs into the parliament. Is that a problem in itself, or do you think there has to be an electoral MP pathway should be given to these MPs?
Well, no, I think the MMP system, I would be a supporter of that, Sandeep. And really the test for me is what happened pre-MMP and what's happened post. So we've had 12 Asian, and I'm just using that broad term for the moment, 12 Asian MPs since MMP came in, and we didn't have a single one prior to that. So in that sense, representation has increased. But it, I think all of us agree that simple representation in and of itself is not sufficient. So what we're looking for really, I think, is a system which engages with the community and then delivers on that engagement. I really do feel very frustrated at times that governments, and I'm not talking about any particular government here, consult. You know, they virtually consult to death, but then it doesn't get fixed. And so I think there are some things that need fixing. The partner visa issue, which was a huge issue for the Indian community, was, for me, a simple fix. And I don't see why it can't be delivered upon. So there are those key elements in terms of a community, in this case, the Indian community, which need, as Sandeep was suggesting, need not simply to be heard, they need to be actually delivered upon. And that, I think, is the frustration. I think the second thing I would just quickly add, Sandeep, is that we've got a new electorate here in Auckland, Takanini. That has a large number of Indian constituents in it. And I looked at the people who were the candidates in that community, and there's always going to be a tension. So a number of those candidates are either Maori or Pacific, and in one case, Lebanese. And I was just expecting that if the political parties were committed, then they would put up a strong electorate candidate who might be Indian, but that hasn't occurred. So I think in these electorates we get these tensions that pull one way and another, and you can understand why there would be strong Pacifica candidates for that electorate. But I would just like to see the political parties beginning to deliver, both in terms of having good, strong candidates and in terms of having that discussion about key policy interests and how they deliver on those.
No, that's great. And thanks for touching on that Takanini electorate issue. Paul, we just want to remind our viewers that Indian Weekender has been on the forefront of that issue. We have been trying to raise issues that probably there was a good chance for sending first electorate Kiwi Indian MP. If either of the political parties, the major political parties, would have been able to decide on a, I would say, deserving Kiwi Indian candidate. And unfortunately, that did not happen. And you have quite rightly said that the selection of a Pacifica candidate does make sense, but there is a lot more to be desired in that space. And that again brings back to the question of commitment that our political parties have got for real political engagement with the ethnic communities. So commenting on what you have suggested and what point you have been raising, do you think there is more a from top to bottom down approach where political parties, they sit in a room, they decide that, okay, we need to get one more Kiwi Indian or maybe say Kiwi Chinese MP, and let's do the maths in this room and let's make some phone calls and let's see who respond to those phone calls and we will bring them to parliament. Do you think that's what is happening right now and there is no grassroots real search for deserving candidates who can actually stand up for their community? Paul, I want to ask from you right now.
I'm not an insider in terms of political process, but my view as an outsider looking in is yes. I think there are various moving parts here. One is to have Indian community members involved in the major political parties. So you need to be part of the political system, and that means becoming members and becoming active. I think the second thing is that political parties need to anticipate having good, strong candidates well ahead of time. You know, 2020 is an election year. You don't sit down at the beginning of 2020 and say, who are going to be our strong candidates for a particular seat? It's very close to an election. So Sandeep and Christchurch, you know, we need as a political party to have him being groomed so he goes through the apprenticeship and then becomes a key candidate. And then I think the political parties seem to me quite old-fashioned. And they're quite old-fashioned because they all want to appeal to the broadest constituency. And we, as I said before, we're incredibly diverse. So when you appeal to that broad constituency, you miss out particular constituencies. And I just think that the size of the Indian community, in particular electorates, deserves to be recognised in various ways. And so I'm just waiting for the moment when we'll get that strong electorate Indian candidate and not have some list candidates. And again, Sandeep, can I make it clear? I mean, I've interacted with some of the Indian MPs. They are lovely people. I'm not questioning them. I'm really questioning the party political system.
Surely, definitely, and there is no doubt about that, Paul. And I will be relaying your message. There is no intention to be attacking anyone personally. It is more about system. It is more about processes. It is more about aspirations as well, as you have rightly pointed out. And Prashant and Sandeep from Christchurch have spoken that on some of the issues, like the latest one was the partnership woos. What probably community was feeling was that they were going and talking to different MPs, including outside of their Kiwi Indian MPs as well. But there was probably lack of accountability, like there was no one political leader or office within the party that would have been held responsible and towards whom the community can turn and address their issues. And probably same is happening right now when we see a lot of temporary migrant workers have been stuck overseas. So what we can tell you from our experience that those migrant workers who are stuck overseas for no fault of their own, they are just door knocking, or I would say Facebook knocking from one leader to another leader, and they don't know where to go, and they are just shooting in the dark. And that is because we haven't got systems in place, as Paul has rightly pointed out. We haven't got right accountability set within the political parties to whom our community members they can reach out. So I will go and ask Prashant. Prashant, you have been here for decades. You have seen that on many occasions there is a lot of, I would say, engagement, which we can now call as probably tokenism. From our MPs with the community. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but engagement is definitely seen, but it is not transforming into any real action. So who do you think is here to be blamed for? Those particular MPs, or it is something within our community organizations and the community itself who are not stepping up to engage and on the real terms?
You have actually hit the right button there, there, Sandeep. I think it's a two-way street. What has happened is that most of the time these MPs and representatives of parliamentary parties are called up for functions or are called up in attendance to the meetings, and then the usual multilingual greetings happen, and beyond that, nothing happens. So it's nice to hear all the, oh, he spoke in my mother tongue, or he spoke in a particular dialect, and that's the enthusiasm part of it. But beyond that, what Sandeep Sharma has said is actually true, that there is no action plan which is being done, neither is there a follow from the community. So I would say that this is a two-way street, a problem from both sides. The community itself has also not stepped up in unison to coherently sort of put up and say that, okay, immaterial of which part of India being a vast country which we represent, we actually have these as common problems with all of us, and we want to be represented, we want to be heard. And what is the solution that is coming from? Now, I do understand, having worked for the government as well, that sometimes sitting outside looking inward, we find it very easy to criticize what the problems are and why is the government not doing things. There might be real valid reasons why they are not really doing it. There might be legal reasons, there might be historical reasons for not doing a particular way. But I think the lack is that there is no communication that goes back into the community and say that, hey, look, your demand, such and such demand, cannot be met for XYZ reasons or because of this legislative hurdles that need to be done. And not stop at that, but just go ahead and then say that, okay, but we understand this is a problem and here is a solution that we can work around, or what is the solution you think we should be looking at? So there might be a different way of looking at solutions. That
Sure.
unfortunately lacking from both sides.
Definitely, and probably that can happen if we can get more energetic leadership. I would say like Sandeep Sharma in Christchurch, who can set out that kind of expectations from their community leaders. So I will be asking Sandeep in a moment, but I just want to go back and ask to you, Prashant, from something that you have touched in your initial introduction. I would say that you were talking about your kids who have grown up now. So probably I would be very honest with you that we rarely engage with them. I haven't like we haven't got an institutionalized way of engaging with them. We don't know how they identify themselves and what are their aspirations. So are you aware of their aspirations as well and how they want to be engaged?
Absolutely. I mean, my son, who is a first-time voter now, I have this regular dialogues with him to understand, what's his viewpoint on the whole process. And he's interested and he's very enthusiastic about the process and wants to vote. And something that became enlightening up to me is, without naming the parties into stuff, he was very clear on saying that whilst I may not accept all the policies of this particular party, some of the actions that they have taken in these difficult times are extremely good, so I would vote for that particular party. But I won't decide on which candidate to vote for until I read what they represent. And as Professor Paul has rightly said, uh, uh, candidate selection has to be a long drawn process. It cannot just say that, the elections are happening in September, so come to know about the candidate in August. That doesn't help you. You need to nurture the constituency. People have to realize what work they have done. How are they going to be represented? And the young generation have their own different difficulties and aspirations, which are completely different from us, which are the first generation migrants or first level of people who come in. And they have their different, what is in future for them, what does this country mean to them. And because they also look at it as a transit point, when they want to go abroad and do their OE and then come back. So that's where their challenges are, and I think it's very important that the aspirations of these are also taken care of by the political parties.
No, great. Thank you very much, Prashant. I think we have a technical glitch and we might have lost Paul, so we will just wait for him to see if he is able to join us again or not. Meanwhile, I will speak to Sandeep. Sandeep, you have made some very valid point that has been, I would say, acknowledged by both Prashant and Professor Paul as well. So, but talking about you, you are definitely a youngster and you want to be engaging with the political process in a more meaningful manner. But you are also a very freshly minted migrant, I would say. So you would not qualify into that first generation migrants who are born and brought up over here. But still, that doesn't make any difference. What I want to understand, like, what has been your understanding so far about this political grooming process? I'm not talking about you personally. I don't want to you to come out and open and say, look, I have got political ambitions or not. But I do want to get your comment, like what has been your understanding so far in the places where you have been or in the Christchurch itself. Do you think that the process of political grooming and engagement and catching prospective people with political ambitions is quite straightforward, open, and transparent, or it's other way around?
Well, Sandeep, first of all, I would say that, it's a global world. We are global citizen. So an aspiration of a youngster coming from any other part of the world is not very different from someone who's a first generation Kiwi as to the children of Mr. Prashant. Because I engage with a lot of first generations Kiwis over here, and we pretty much have the same values aligned. We care for the planet. We care for issues which matter to the society. So that being said, as far as things that I've observed on ground over here, is that yes, I agree to some extent with what Prashant said, that candidates should not just pop up a couple of months before the electorate is announced. It should be a person or a known member who's been engaging with the society for some time, and people have certain amount of trust and faith in the person, so that familiarity is very important. That is something which I feel we could do a better job at. Youngsters should have more say. We do listen to political parties in New Zealand saying that, but when it comes to, like, handing over the baton to the next generation, there's a bit of a hesitance, where we have these young energetic people that I've been talking to, not really getting the opportunity that I would like them to have. So that's where somewhere we could do better. So just to answer round up, and my answer to your question is that, yeah, we need people who are more engaged with the community on a daily basis, not just someone who comes out of the blues and says, yes, I was in the corporate before and here I am, want to go into politics. And the second aspect, yes, younger faces, fresh faces would be nice to see, because we kind of relate them to them more.
Great. Well, Sandeep, I would say that rather than putting out your own political ambitions out in bare, you have laid out ambitions for your entire younger generations, asking more share. Well, which is one of the biggest issues that our modern democracies they are facing globally, with youngsters and millennials wanting their share. And I would say older generations they are trying to hold their fort. It is again a bigger discussion to be followed up somewhere else. But the good thing is that Professor Paul has been able to join us back. Paul, for a moment, I thought probably you've started receiving some phone calls from our Kiwi Indian MPs. So it's glad that glad to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Sandeep, and I do apologize. I don't know what happened.
No, that's okay. So, Paul, in our absence, probably we continued and we were just having a chat, and I think Sandeep has laid out quite a nice point, along with Prashant as well. They were talking about that there is a need for a more systematic approach of grooming, I would say, of political aspirants, and that should be an open process. That should be an entrenched with the community as well. As Prashant has pointed out, it has to be a two-way process. The community also needs to stand up and step up, I would say. There is no point complaining when throughout the, I would say, 3 years and not doing anything when it comes, when the moment comes to act. So, Paul, what we would like you to comment upon, probably one thing that probably I might not have told my audiences that you write prolifically. Probably from my last count, you had 25 books. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you have traveled globally as well. So we would like to know from your overseas experience or from your international research experience, where do you think, in which immigrant countries, probably they have got a better political engagement process with the ethnic migrant communities?
I wouldn't look to Australia, but I would look to Canada. And I think the thing that strikes me about Canada is, firstly, they have many more decades ahead of us. I mean, we've talked about the number of Indians arriving here as migrants, the number of international students who come to New Zealand. And certainly the Indian community is bulking up in a sense of size. But Canada's had that for some time. And in the Canadian Parliament, I think the thing that strikes me is that Indian representation is much more normal. It's been there for a lot longer, and we've got some wonderful examples of it. But secondly, the community has itself come together in a community and political sense, and we've got very clear organizations which operate in terms of engagement with the political process. The community itself is much better organized, and it's that both of those elements which I think are missing here, but which you can see very vividly in terms of Canada. And then, of course, you've got these very large cities like Toronto or Vancouver, where you've got long-established Indian communities, powerful communities which are well-established economically, which are well-established in terms of having community organizations that have been around for a long time, which operate very effectively. And I think that's a sort of maturity issue, Sandeep. I mean, you and I have looked at the facilities that have been developed here in Auckland and South Auckland in terms of the football community. Sure. And, you can see the sort of mobilization and the way in which Sarpreet Singh has been supported by that community. And look at him now, and I think what we're looking for is that equivalent politically. I don't know whether that's a long bow, but I think the football analogy is a good one.
No, definitely. And that is probably, I would say, one of the highest point for the Kiwi Indian community, to have a member of Kiwi Indian community being looked after so well and at the height of national representation in the game. Definitely, I think, Paul, you have touched it quite nicely. Probably everyone who have been trying to delve into this mystery of lack of enough political engagement of the Kiwi Indian community, they have been from time to time comparing with overseas comparisons like Canada, Australia, and US as well. But I'm not sure, like you have definitely touched that it's all about maturity, it's all about economic weight, that and also the integration part as well of the community. But in your view, what do you think the Kiwi Indian community needs to do more to actually bring more maturity into this political engagement process? Paul, Paul, are you there? I think yeah, there are again some technical issues. So maybe I will continue and speak to Prashant, who have seen enough here in last 3 decades. And so Prashant, would you like to touch base on that, like how we as Kiwi Indian community and also the broader ethnic migrant community can do more to participate in that political engagement process?
It's a very good question, and I think the first step towards it is would be that community themselves have to start looking at providing candidates and providing a political aspirations within the community, even if they start at local governments. When the local community government council stuff starts, we can start looking at representing over there to get a feel and get a touch of ground realities of what the political process is. If we start engaging at that level, the DHB level, the local council levels, then it can migrate up to a national level. It's the gap is quite huge actually.
Well, I think yeah, you made a quite a valid point, Prashant, there, because right now what we are seeing is more like a lone wolf kind of, I would say, efforts where some individual I would say, with own personal political aspirations, they are trying to step up in those DHP and local council elections.
Correct.
But I think you make a very valid point that has to be systemized, and probably that calls upon more leadership and more maturity, I would say, maturer role from our existing community organizations, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. That though even though we have a disparate range of community representatives or community organizations, what they need to really understand is come up front and say that look, Chinese are a great example of that. While individually they also have divisions within their own group, but when it comes to representing or talking to the government, they actually have a unison in their voice. And I've seen them in their Lantern Festival organization meetings over here in Auckland and other stuff. While as we run 5 Diwali festivals in Auckland, which itself, while that's what I'm saying, I'm not trying to say anything is right or wrong, but what I'm trying to say here is we need that unity within our the Kiwi Indian community to sort of sum up and say that this is real. This is because there's a lot of implication and there are results of our actions. We need to have a cohesive force and representation in the parliament, and that can be done only if we join all our hands together and nurture the candidates to come up and represent us in there, not really people with their own political ambitions.
Definitely, and I think just to add on that, Prashant, probably we need to see more action. That our eclectic debate, like we as Kiwi Indian community, I'm sure you would also appreciate that. We love to have those eclectic debates on social media on
Yep.
a lot of issues under the sun, not only confined to New Zealand. Anything under the sun, but
Yep.
I think that needs to be translated into more groundwork and more ground politics, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what is the key part of it, that we got to accept that there is diversity, but we also need to have that uniform approach towards saying that we as a community have a substantial stake in ground, and that stake needs to be translated in terms of real value and vote.
Great, thanks. Now I will be going to speak to Sandeep, and then probably I will come back and we will sum up with Professor Paul, who is again back with us. So welcome again, Paul. So going back to Sandeep, I would say that Sandeep, if I have to ask you that, according to you, according to your understanding of last probably 5 or maybe 7 odd years here in New Zealand, if you have to say, what would be your three main issues that would decide your votes in the coming election? So, what would those issues be?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Uh, See, I think as an outsider, when people come to New Zealand, they choose New Zealand for um, stability, the clarity that this country provides in terms of outsiders coming here, and peacefulness. What has been missing is the clarity and a bit of stability, where immigration plays a very important role. So I think moving forward, if people who are choosing or looking at New Zealand, or people who are already here and made this country as their home, get further clarity into what a future could look like. So I've got a neat 20, 30 years ahead of me to build my professional career? Should I be looking at New Zealand, which is isolated and cut off from the world, as we always say? It's a smaller market, but it's a stable place, it's a peaceful place. But what's the clarity for me in terms of my profession? You know, whether there is going to be enough opportunity for me or not. So that is going to be the key, where we need the government to provide clarity to people like us. And second, I would like to reiterate what Prashant said, that using the experience of the previous generation or people who've come here 20, 30 years ago, um, and supporting someone who has the motivation and the desire to serve the society and the community, and pushing that person forward to go for roles in the council or the community board and further on, would be something that I would like to see happen more.
Great, thank you. Now, Prashant, can I just check with you, like based on your experience so far, what would be the three main issues that would decide your vote in the coming elections?
I'll agree with clarity part of it. What Sandeep mentioned, the clarity in terms of what happens. It's easy to get migrants from overseas under different pretext over here. But what happens when they come in, and what is the future lying for them? So that's something that I would really like to try, like a real clarity from all the people over here, and not policies which keep changing into that one. Secondly, uh, uh, as a country, there's a whole lot of talk going on about in terms of universal wages and minimum employment wages and all that stuff. We are a very isolated community. Some of the things that will impact us in commercially or financially are huge, and in fact, the COVID debt now is going to be a big burden onto us. How sustainable is our policy for us to be under these isolated circumstances is what something that I would be really keen on understanding. So you can bring on, as they say, there's a saying in India that you can put on many masks, but the mask of money can never be put on, because that needs real policies into that one. And that has to be a real clarity in terms of what is the policy, how are we going to address this huge mountain of debt, because right now I don't see this as an with a finite definite ending. So that's the key second issue into that one. And thirdly is, how are we going to address the different aspirations of diversity within our community? And I think that's very important, that when are we going to get out of the past and try to look at it from a future proofing our society? That's something that I would really be keen on.
Great, thank you, Prashant. Those were very eclectic observation, I would say, and aspirations as well. It remains to be seen if our political parties would be able to pick up those and act on those. But from what I'm hearing from you and Sandeep from Christchurch, is you both are demanding a lot on clarity. And in terms of, from my understanding, is that being an immigrant nation and us being the newest ethnic minority migrant community, probably uncertainty or rather certainty around immigration would be one of the biggest issues, and probably that actually necessitates to go and speak to none other than Paul himself, who has joined us again. So Paul, you are an authority, on immigration, and from what I know that you had recently concluded a very, very important book on immigration. So can you briefly touch base about your book and just tell us, are we still going to meet the projections that you had made in the pre-COVID book that you've written?
Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you for the book. Somewhere, somebody is not liking what I'm saying, so I'm dropping out a little bit, and I apologize.
No, but that means that you are talking right and you are making sense, and that puts us more responsibility to basically, yeah, keep you connected and let your thoughts out.
Yeah, well, I've been looking at the immigration statistics for the last year. So the statistics have just come out to June 2020, and we've had the largest inflow of migrants ever in our history. We've had the largest net gain in our history, almost 80,000 people. And of course, as Prashant and Sandeep have been saying, the Indians make up a big chunk of that. So I think there are several things that, and I can just bullet point them, Sandeep. One is, what about the people who are here on temporary visas? Shouldn't we perhaps think about an amnesty? So if they're here as international students or on temporary work visas, can we, because they're stuck here under COVID, can we allow them to stay? The second are the people who've been given approval but are sitting offshore. So how can we bring them in here and meet the contractual obligations we have as a country? The third is that I think what happens after settlement. I think we've under-invested in settlement processes. So I don't have too many problems with our immigration system in terms of how it recruits and approves people. We can improve that, but I think one of the big gaps has been what we do once people arrive here. How do we help them settle here as business people, as people looking for jobs, in terms of their English language competency, all those sorts of things? I don't think we do a particularly good job. And the final thing is to say, everything is so uncertain. I think that many of the things that I've seen internationally suggest that international mobility is not going to resume until 2023 or 2024. It's not going to somehow that we write off 2020 and January 2021 comes and suddenly we're back to normal. It's not going to be like that. So we've got to have some pretty tough discussions about that. And can I just end on, and this is probably an unfortunate note to end on, but when we start and talk about this, I think we run up against either unconscious bias or sometimes explicit racism. It's somehow seen that the Indian community are talking about their own interests and nobody else's. These issues that I've talked about apply to all of us. I mean, remember, nearly 30% of us are immigrants in this country. 40% of us in Auckland are immigrants. And about 60% of us in Auckland are the children of either immigrants or the children of immigrants. So these issues around immigration are common to all of us. And it's not an Indian issue, even though they are one of the communities most impacted.
No,
Who's
definitely.
who's talking about those in the selection campaign?
Sure, definitely. And I would completely agree with you on that. These are definitely not Indian issues. And the point that you are raising, that asking for a general amnesty for, I would say, students or the temporary visa holders who are stuck overseas due to this COVID-19 border closures, they all are definitely not Indians. So when we lobby for them, we certainly are not lobbying for any one race. And well, that's what we are doing. But I would definitely like to congratulate you for raising that point so boldly, so that our political parties or politicians who are shying away right now due to the necessity of winning an election to actually do justice to those big chunk of people who are actually facing the brunt of COVID-19 disruptions. They need to pick up them. So thanks for raising that point, Paul. And I would say that probably one of the valid thing I would say that we need to do more. We need to do more as a community when we are talking as a Kiwi Indian community. But probably New Zealand as a nation also need to do more. As you have rightly said that New Zealand as a nation need to invest more in the post-settlement thing so that we ensure that the new migrants that we have got in this country, they are ably integrated into the New Zealand, wider New Zealand, and we create a more richer and more competent New Zealand. And from what you are telling us, that probably there is not much good news in terms of international mobility for next 2-3 years, then we need to do and look after our existing people that we have got right now and nurture them and make this political process more engaging. So probably that's a good note to end. And I would like to say thanks to all of you, Paul, Prashant and Sandeep. I would say it was quite an interesting engagement and conversation today. I'm pretty sure our Kiwi Indian audiences and the wider ethnic migrant community who are watching this would be enriching from this debate. So feel free to write to us at editor@indianweekender.co.nz. We will continue the process. If need be, we'll knock at Paul's door again and we will speak to him again. And anyways, we will be speaking to Prashant and Sandeep more often from here. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Thanks for
opportunity.
having